are stronger, you are stronger. Sin is broken, you have saved me. It is written, Christ is risen. Jesus, you are Lord of all. No beginning and no end. You're my hope and my defense. You came to seek and save the lost. You paid it all upon the cross.
What is it that Samson did that was good besides? What is it that Samson did that was good? His story in Judges 13 through 16 seems like just one bad decision after another. Travis Harmon is the Director of Student Services at Heritage Christian University, and he preaches for the Collinwood Church of Christ in Collinwood, Tennessee. In this lesson, he helps us think about what all those bad decisions help us to understand about the life of faith.
Hello. We're going to look at Hebrews chapter 11 just a little bit, and this is a very famous chapter in Scripture. This is one of the more famous chapters in all of Scripture, I think we could argue. It's right there with the 23rd Psalm or Acts chapter 2 or Genesis chapter 1, and 1 Corinthians chapter 11, that great chapter on love. Here we have Hebrews chapter 11, or 1 Corinthians chapter 13, that great chapter on love. But here we have the chapter that we call the Hall of Fame of Faith. And it is just a beautiful chapter, and each one of these names are just heroes of the faith. If you look through and you just scan through Hebrews chapter 11, Abel and Enoch and Noah and Abraham and Sarah. These are some of the greatest heroes throughout all of the Old Testament history. And you have Abraham and Isaac and Joseph and Moses. And then you have Rahab and Samson. Well, what are those doing there? What's Rahab and Samson? What is Samson doing there? I know a lot of times when we have VBS, we think of Samson as like he's the strong man, and we'll have that circus VBS big top, and Samson will be the strong man, and so we'll celebrate Samson as this hero, and he's our strong man. Well, the problem is if you've ever read the story of Samson, you know it just doesn't really work that well. It doesn't work as well as we would like to fit it in there, and it's certainly, above all things, this is not a kid's story. This is not just your average kid's story. His story starts in Judges chapter 13, and so I want us to look over at Judges chapter 13 and just give a brief, we'll just look at this for a little while to try to get this, it's relatively short, but I want us to try to kind of get this in our head a little bit. In Judges chapter 13, you have the story of Samson's birth. And his mother is barren and can't have children, and his father, Manoah, him and his wife, they have no children. And the Lord appears to her. This is really kind of reminiscent of a couple other stories in Scripture. But the Lord appears to her and tells her she's going to have a child. The parents get together. We could actually have a fantastic story of faith about the parents because they get together and they pray and they say, hey, send the angel back so that he can teach us how to bring up our child and what we should do. And the angel does come back and tells them, you're going to have this child and he's going to be a Nazarite from birth. Nazarite is from the Hebrew, and it means that he's going to be separated or consecrated to the Lord, that he's going to be separate from everybody else. And there are a few things in this Nazarite vow that are really important. In the Nazarite vow, you're never going to have anything that is of the fruit of the vine. You're never going to have anything of grapes. You are never going to cut your hair, and you're never going to desecrate yourself. You're never going to come in contact with anything that's dead or become ceremonially or ritually impure because you've come in contact with something or someone specifically that's deceased. And so this is the rules that they've given his parents. And then Samson is born, and in chapter 14 you have the stories that start about Samson himself. The first story that you have is, this is right after Israel has gone in to the promised land, and they've occupied the promised land, but they are not doing what they were supposed to have done. They were supposed to completely drive out the people, and now you have this cycle that happens where the Israelites, they will forget about God, and God will punish them. The only way that you can punish a nation, or the way that you punish a nation, is you send somebody to oppress them. And at this point, it's the Philistines. And so the Philistines are ruling over them. And so God sets up these judges who are deliverers, and they sort of save Israel from time to time. And so Samson is going to be that for Israel at this point. And so Samson, he picks, instead of doing what he's supposed to do and picking a wife from among the Israelites, he picks one that is a Philistine. And his parents try to talk him out of it, but in chapter 14, he says, "Get her for me, for she pleases me well." And so they're going to go and try to barter and make a deal so that Samson can marry this lady. As Samson, as he's going down there, he encounters a lion, and he kills the lion. There's a really important phrase here that says, "The Spirit of the Lord came upon him." So in verse 6 of chapter 14, the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he kills the lion like he would kill a baby goat. And then he goes on, and as he goes on to see her, as he returns, he sees that the lion, now in the lion's carcass, there's a beehive, and there's honey that is now in the carcass of the lion. He goes back, he returns, and he makes a deal at his wedding. He says, "Hey, I got a riddle for you. If you can solve my riddle, then I'm going to give you garments. And if you solve the riddle, if you solve the riddle, then I'll give you garments. But if you can't, then all of you will give me garments." And of course, he comes up with this riddle, this brilliant, wise poet. He comes up with this riddle. "Out of the eater came something to eat, and out of the strong came something sweet." Of course, the riddle is, it's like cheating. It's almost exactly like in Tolkien's The Hobbit, where Bilbo finds the ring in his pocket, and he's having a riddle contest with Gollum, and by accident he solves all of Gollum's riddles. And he puts his hand in his pocket at one point, and he finds there's something that is in his pocket he doesn't recognize immediately, and he says to himself, "What's in my pocket?" And Gollum thinks that that's the riddle that he has to solve. And so he wins the competition by sort of cheating, and it seems to me that that's how Samson is. He's not the strong man. Really, he's a clown. And what's this clown's riddle? And they know that there's no way that they can solve this riddle. And so they go to his wife and they say, "Hey, tell us, you go find out. Did you invite us here so that he can steal from us, so he can take advantage of us? Go find out what the answer is, and let us know." And so she goes and she says, "You must really hate me. You don't love me. If you loved me," in verse 16 of chapter 14, "you would have told me what the answer to the riddle is." And so he tells her what the answer to the riddle is. Immediately, she goes and tells them. Immediately, they devise what they're going to do, and they come back and they tell him, "What is sweeter than honey, and what's stronger than a lion?" And in here, this great philosopher, this man of wisdom, he has this brilliant line, "If you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have solved my riddle." And so then, here again in verse 19, the Spirit of the Lord comes upon him mightily. He goes to another town and he attacks the Philistines. He takes the garments that were his wager. He comes back and he gives it to the people that he made the wager with to pay his debt. And he's mad and he goes home. after a while, he decides he's going to come back. And then in chapter 15, he comes back and he wants to see his wife, but his father-in-law had given her to his best friend. Now, that's enough to make anybody angry. But what Samson does is he goes out and he collects, you know this story, he collects 300 foxes, he ties them together, and he ties their tails together, and he ties a torch between each of them. And so they go running out through the grain fields, and it says that it destroys their standing grain, those that are in shocks, and the vineyards and their olive groves. And so he completely decimates their food supply. Because of this, they ask, who did this? And the answer comes back, the son-in-law of the Temanite, and they go to him, and they kill him, and they kill his wife. They kill Samson's father-in-law and his wife by burning them. Then Samson, he is furious about that. And he's incredibly mad about that. And so he goes and he slays them. He attacked them hip and thigh and with a great slaughter in chapter 15, verse 8. And so after that, he goes and he hides. I mean, this just makes so much sense. He goes and he hides under a rock. And the Philistines come to the men of Judah and they say that they want Samson. And the men of Judah all go and they decide that they're going to talk to Samson. And they talk to Samson and they tell him, we're going to arrest you and we're going to take you and turn you over to the Philistines. And Samson agrees to that on the condition that they don't kill him themselves. They agree and they take him and they turn him over to the Philistines. The Philistines, as soon as he encounters the Philistines, he breaks the new ropes that were binding him. He found a fresh jawbone, in verse 15, of a donkey, and he reached out his hand and he took it, and he killed 1,000 men with it. Then Samson, who is also a lyricist, he's a singer-songwriter, he sings this genius song, with the jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps, with the jawbone of a donkey, I have slain 1,000 men. Some of the translations, they translate this, they maybe help him out a little bit, and they say, with the jawbone of a donkey, I have made donkeys of them. With the jawbone of a donkey, I have slain 1,000 men. You know, again, it just doesn't sound like he's a hero so much as he's just a clown. He's just absolutely a clown. Then you have these two other really short stories. There's a story right here that he goes in verse 18, he becomes so thirsty that he cries out to God and he says, have you given me this great victory, then you're going to let me die. And God provides water for him out of a rock. And then in chapter 16 starts with this short story about him going down to a prostitute. It's absolutely fascinating that all these things that he's supposed to avoid, that he seems like he is ritually impure all the time. In verse 1 of chapter 16, he goes down and he sees a harlot there and he went into her. And the men find out that he's there, and they decide that in the morning they're going to attack him, but he takes the gates of the city, he picks them up, and he carries them about 40 miles to Judah, which I wonder if this is a message for them, since they had handed him over. And then we have the story of Delilah that begins in verse 4. And so he falls in love with Delilah, and the lords of the Philistines come to her, and they say, we'll give you 11,000 pieces of silver each if you will tell us what the secret to his strength is. And so she begins to ask him, what's the secret to your strength? And at first he says it's 7 fresh bowstrings. She gets him to fall asleep. She ties him up. He breaks them, she gets him to fall asleep. She ties him up, and then she yells, the Philistines are upon you, and the people are hiding there in the chamber that run out, and he breaks them like they're nothing. The same thing happens. She asks him again. He says, well, it's new ropes. Well, apparently they didn't know the story that had happened. They hadn't read the text, because we already know that new ropes don't work. The same thing happens. She yells, "The Philistines are upon you." He breaks the new ropes. And then we have the same thing happen the third time. And this time it's with, "If you weave my hair into a web of a loom, then I'll be weak like everybody else." And so she does that. Same thing. This time he pulls it out, no problem. And then she presses him. "You have mocked me these 3 times. And she cries and she says, hey, she pestered him daily with her words and pressed him so that his soul was vexed unto death. And finally he breaks down, he tells her, "No, I'm a Nazirite, and I've been a Nazirite from birth." I think we could argue that. But he says, "I've been a Nazirite from birth, and if you cut my hair, no razors ever touch my head. If you cut my hair, then I'm going to be as weak as everybody else." She lures him to fall asleep. They cut his hair, and it says, I think he's surprised. He thinks that he's going to get up and do just like always. In verse 20, "I will go out as before, and all the other times, and I will shake myself free." But he did not know that the Lord had departed from him. Now the Philistines, they all gather together and they celebrate. And Dagon, their god, and they rejoiced and said, "Our God has delivered to us into our hands Samson, our enemy." Of course, this is just an insult. And Samson is brought out. They gouge his eyes out after they arrest him and they seize him. And they put him, and there's got to be some irony, they put him in, and he's treading grain out of the strong, something to eat. I think there's got to be some irony in that. They bring him out to mock him, and he tells the lad, "Put me between the pillars," and he prays to God one last time to give me strength, and he pushes the pillars, and the roof falls down, and he kills all the Philistines that were there. What is this guy doing? I mean, it seems like this is a clown. What is he doing in the Hall of Fame of Faith? What is he doing there? Why is he in the Hall of Fame of Faith? And why is Rahab in the Hall of Fame of Faith? Rahab, her last name is harlot. It's Rahab the harlot. And if you're going to insult somebody, the worst thing that you could say to some lady is that you are a lying harlot. And Samson, what are these two doing there? Well, they're commended for their faith. Rahab in Joshua chapter 2, verse 8, she has this beautiful speech. She goes up to the spies on the rooftop, and she has this beautiful speech that she delivers to them. And she says, "Everyone's courage failed because of you, for the Lord your God is God in heaven and above and on all the earth." She knows that God is God. And she believes, she knows what God's done for them, and she gives a history of what's happened. She's not commended because of her past mistakes. She's not commended because of her lie, and she's not commended because of her past errors. She's commended because of her faith. And Samson is too. In Hebrews chapter 11, back in Hebrews chapter 11, in verse 1, there you see that it says, "Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. For by it the elders obtained a good testimony." The elders obtained a good testimony because of their faith. Because of their faith. Some of the other translations, they translate that verse and say, "Now faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see." That's what the ancients were commended for, is because they were certain of something that they could not see. Samson made a request to God, and he knew that God would help him. And it says he pushed with all of his might. He had a responsibility to do the best he could, and God did the rest. But it does seem like these guys are out of place. Do you ever feel that way? Do you ever feel like, I am out of place? What am I doing in church with all these good people? I feel like, man, what am I doing here? These people are our good people. I have felt out of place a lot of times. Years ago, I went and I did a job interview with the Federal Air Marshals. At that time, I was just an administrator, and I went down to this it was an unbelievable facility. And so they had to let us in the first door. Then there was a vestibule, and there was about 20 of us who had gone to apply that day or had gone for the interviews. One of the guys came out from behind another super heavy door, and he was talking to us in this lobby that was all glass and stainless steel. I felt exactly like Will Smith in the movie Men in Black. He was asking everybody what they did, and one of them was like, "Yeah, I serve on the Red Dog team of the SWAT in Atlanta Metro." The next guy was an Army Ranger. The next guy was an ICE agent, and it just went on down the line. And I thought, oh, please don't let him ask me. What am I doing here? You know, I think if somebody wrote down all my mistakes in life, it'd be pretty terrible. It'd be terrible reading. But God's not condemning me for the mistakes, but He's commending us for the faith. We still have to do our part. There's action that's still required. But you know, what is this clown doing in this Hall of Fame of faith? Well, he was faithful. He had faith. In Hebrews chapter 11, look at verse 6. In Hebrews chapter 11, verse 6, without faith it is impossible to please Him. That's what I want to do. I want to please Him. For he who comes to God must believe that He is, and that He is a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. That's what we do. We believe that there is a God, and we believe in God, and we want to diligently seek Him. You know, I'm not the strong man. I feel like I'm a clown. People who know my backstory would say, "What is this clown doing here teaching us Bible? What is this clown doing here?" I can associate with Samson. Not the great feats of strength, but have being the comic relief. I really think that that's what Samson is. I think that it's written like Jewish comedy. I think if you go back and you read it like comedy, it'll make a lot more sense to you. In Hebrews chapter 12, right at the end of this section, Hebrews chapter 12, therefore we also, since we are surrounded with so great a cloud of witness, let us lay aside every weight and sin which does so easily ensnare us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. When I was in high school, I moved from Thomasville, Alabama. We played football, and we moved to Harmon, Illinois, and their big sport was Roman Greco wrestling. And I wanted to be on the wrestling team, and the coach told me, "Hey, you're a little overweight. To make weight, you need to run. I'm the cross-country coach. Start running cross-country." And so I started running on the cross-country team. That was terrible. And every meet that I started running with the team, and eventually a couple of our guys got hurt, and the coach came to us and said, "Hey, you made the team. There's 7 people on the cross-country team, and you're going to be our 7th man." And every meet that we went to, I came in second to dead last. I decided I will not be dead last, but I came in second to dead last in every meet. I remember, my buddies would finish, and they would come around, and they would watch me, and they said, "Hey, the real race is who's going to be dead last, because those are people who don't have any natural ability or talent, but they've got heart." And so it will always be me and somebody else running for dead last. And I remember one time we went to Albany, Illinois, and we had a sectional meet. And when they tallied all the scores, they only count the top 5. And if one of the top 5 gets hurt, then they'll count the next or the next. So really you have 2 that are kind of running as backups. And so when they tallied my top 5 guys, we won the sectional meet. And when they handed out trophies, I had raced for second to dead last, but I got one of the trophies. I got a trophy for winning this Albany, Illinois sectional cross-country meet, and I finished second to dead last. That's what Christianity is. You just got to be on the right team. You got to be diligently seeking Him, and you've got to run the race with endurance. It doesn't matter if somebody thinks, on the cross-country team, what is this clown doing here? This clown's running on the right team.
No beginning and no end. You're my hope and my defense. You came to seek and save the lost. You paid it all upon the cross. You are stronger. You are stronger. Sin is broken. You have saved.